One of the most common questions or concerns that I've seen among faculty is, does ChatGPT plagiarize? Or at least the presumption that it does. The assumption behind this concern is that it looks like generative AI may be gathering its sources from across the internet or its training data and compiling it to render its answers. If so, then wouldn't that be essentially mosaic plagiarism, or what's sometimes called patch or incremental plagiarism? That occurs when a student borrows phrases from a source without using quotation marks or finds synonyms for the author's language while keeping to the same general structure and meaning of the original. Is that what ChatGPT is doing? Well, we did talk about a large language model earlier, and that is the data set that the generative AI is trained on. So is it just taking phrases and excerpts from various files and authors and stitching them all together to form something it claims is new? And the answer to that is a resounding no. That's simply not how generative AI works. So how does generative AI think? Well, it works entirely by predictive analytics using a large data set. According to Stephen Wolfram, now that's the computational programming guy behind Wolfram Alpha, he says what ChatGPT is always fundamentally trying to do is produce a reasonable continuation of whatever text it's got so far, where by reasonable we mean what one might expect someone to write after seeing what people have written on billions of web pages. Believe it or not, it is literally adding just one word at a time. So if we've got the phrase, the sky is blank, then it's going to be scanning the massive data set of its large language model to predict the next most likely word in our context. If the data it's using shows stats like you see in the blue box here, then the word it appends here will undoubtedly be blue. However, it's also scanning the related context of our input window and the LLM's context, and it's adjudicating its data through the lens of variable tokens. So if the context is a weather forecast, it will likely forego the obvious larger number from our general context and instead look at instances from the LLM where weather forecasting is the context. And in that case, it will likely generate the word stormy or perhaps hazy, depending on other tokens in the context window. If the context is poetry and art, then it's likely going to forego the obvious larger numbers from the general and weather context and will look at its LLM for instances where poetry and artistic beauty are the context. And so in that case, it will likely generate the words turquoise or tranquil. It's important to keep in mind that generative AI is only as reliable as its training data. For ChatGPT, the free version had been limited to a cutoff of September 2021, but within the last month or so, they've started adding later training data. But it still does not have access to any information on events that occurred after its cutoff date, unless you're on the Plus version and use it with being enabled. For others, it kind of depends on the data it was trained on. So here's an example. For one of my daughter's school assignments, she was asked to write a creative story in the style of Laura Numeroff's book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. Well, she plays flute, so she decided to go with If You Give a Flamingo a Flute. She wanted to illustrate it, which wasn't a requirement. So after verifying that the teacher didn't have any originality requirements for illustration, I excitedly told her how we could use a generative AI tool called DALL-E to create imaginative images like that. So first, we told it we wanted to see a pink cartoon-like flamingo playing a metal flute. Here are a few of the images it generated for us. Not quite what we had in mind. The one on the left looks like it's doing a tap dancing number with a weird trumpet. And the one on the right looks suspiciously like a clarinet to me, or at least I've never seen a flute played that way. So then we told it we wanted to see a realistic pink flamingo on the edge of a pond playing a silver sea flute with a weeping willow behind her. I have no idea what a silver sea flute is, but my daughter insisted that that's what she needed to tell it to get the right answer. And here are a few of the images it generated for us. None of these look like a flute. The one on the far right isn't even silver, and I guess that flamingo's meditating on it. And the one on the left, I have no idea what that is or what the bird's doing. So what's going on here? Well, this is a good example of the challenge of limited examples in the data set. If the data it's trained on doesn't have sufficient examples, it can't generate artwork that mimics it. So I'm guessing that whomever compiled the training data tagged most of the training examples as instruments, with only some specific examples of certain types of instruments. And the AI knows that a flute is a type of instrument, so it tried to render those. But without sufficient examples of a flute that are tagged in the data set, specifically, it couldn't generate what it doesn't know. This is also why we often see examples of AI-driven bias regarding gender, ethnicity, and other variables. The output as a whole reflects the data it trained on, whether that was comprehensive and robust or fairly limited or even lacking diversity. And on that note, Amy Webb's book, The Big Nine, is a great resource for understanding the big picture of AI and how it has and will continue to impact our culture and world civilization over the next several decades. And her chapter 2, The Insular World of AI's Tribes, is eye-opening. That group of computer scientists who gathered at Dartmouth in 1956 and coined the term artificial intelligence, all white men, all university educated, and all in their 40s at the time. And which universities have been most receptive to data science and receive the most funding and support from corporations and government? Secular, progressive, liberal universities like Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, Harvard, UC Berkeley, Cornell, and MIT, and others. And because these were hard science fields in the 60s and 70s, guess who wasn't represented in their research studies or in the early data sets? There are exceptions here and there, but across the broad spectrum of AI research and development as a whole, the three biggest voices which have been missing are women, minorities, and conservatives. AI, all are significantly underrepresented. Now, I should note it is possible to work around this limitation and get generative AI to provide answers about religion, Jesus, women, minorities, and more. But it is not necessarily its default answer. You have to prompt for that. Another big limitation of AI is that it doesn't know the subject or understand the data it's spitting out. And remember, it's just using predictive analytics to determine what words come next in context. A generative AI can't think. It's not generating original thought, and it can't explain or process the relationships between the words it provides. It's simply analyzing data and making predictions. Likewise, it has no empathy. It has no idea why these words or these visual examples it generates are significant or occur more frequently in the data set, and it has no context or connection to explain that. Furthermore, it can't do emotion. It may find examples of where humans have used emotional terms and phrases to communicate, but it won't understand what that means or how it connects. And lastly, it has no understanding. It knows the terms and phrases that appeared most frequently in the data set, and it scanned the context to be able to generate that, but it has no comprehension of what it actually means. It's simply making a prediction with each word choice. Essentially, other people who've answered this question and the data it was trained on have answered it blank. So the next most logical word is going to be blank. I ran into a humorous example of this. I was testing how well ChatGPT could respond to questions which are typical of a credentialing interview. The questions requiring objective, unbiased knowledge, it nailed it. The questions which required some subjective contextual awareness coupled with knowledge, it did fairly well once I gave it a role and context to play. But when I got to behavioral and situational questions, it answered as if it were a human describing instances and examples of where it had done that particular behavior or reflective practice, like describing its personal gifts for ministry and what they include. Huh? How? Well, it was finding multiple examples of where humans had done that and answered along those lines, so it used predictive analytics to respond. It imitated what it saw and what it had seen others do on similar questions, but it had no context for what that meant, and that became very evident when I asked it follow-up questions. So I asked, how many years have you been serving in pastoral ministry? And it answered with clear evidence that it's an AI and has no personal history or experience to draw upon.